Welcome to another weekend here on the platform. It is our tradition to examine the developments in the polity, and today's program will follow suit. My name is Sam Omashaye. Going by recent happenings, it will be pardonable to describe the security situation in many states as fragile. Security operatives on different fronts warding off attacks and violence, but it is no easy task. Weeks ago, it was the Nigerian army that suffered casualties in the fight against insurgency. Now it is the police admitting to the killing of 16 of its officers by bandits in Zamfara state. Also, if it was science fiction, stories of a cloned president would have been an easy pill to swallow. But in reality, can a body double be so efficient as to fool an entire country, including the president's family, cabinet members, and allies for so long? Well, President Muhammadu Buhari finally addressed rumors of his death and replacement in Poland. He says he is the real him and not Jubril of Sudan. And the dust is yet to settle from the contentious primaries conducted by the APC in some states. Ogun State Governor Ibikunle Amosun, a close ally of President Buhari, has been up in arms against the party's national chairman, Adams Oshomole, whom he and 4 other governors accuse of scuttling the chances of their preferred candidates. If recent statements credited to him are anything to go by, he will support his party in some elections and work against it in others.
Remember, this is only one aspect of our work.
Yes.
If you look at other aspects, for instance, on the registration of political parties, some associations have dragged us to court.
Big Talk is with INEC Chairman, Professor Mahmood Yakubu. Public affairs analyst Adewale Adeoye and lawyer Jide Ologun join me to discuss burning national issues in the country. You're welcome to this show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Now, let us start with those whose jobs it is to secure ordinary civilians have themselves become the prey. Why have security agents in the country become animals of interest and target of mindless killers? Let's start with Ologun.
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. And basically, you look at the vision of the Nigerian police, which is to maintain a secured environment that will facilitate national development and growth. And in the process of this, the mission is to ensure the police is friendly with the people, they embark on intelligence gathering, they are well trained for the job, and the welfare is given a maximum attention. But if you ask me, going by what we have had in the country, we have not kept faith with the mission. And when you don't keep faith with the mission, you are not likely to achieve the vision. And of course, with what happened in Zamfara, it's quite disturbing in the sense that the criminals that should be overrun by the police are now intimidating the police, and that portends a great danger to the populace. But if you look at some recent events too in the country, you may be tempted to shift focus to prioritization. For example, when you look at the energy with which the Nigerian police besieged the National Assembly, we may be quick to say they should not be involved in politics. But when they are involved in politics, even with the excuse of performing their duties, they show so much prowess and diligence. We have the case of Akwa Ibom House of Assembly situation also, and you begin to wonder that which is more important, political interest or protecting the people?
I mean, this is criminality in Zamfara, which we thought had kind of died down. Doesn't mean that it has not died down, but it means that it can suffer a resurgence.
Yeah, it can.
Yeah.
Well, I think what happened in Zamfara is quite unfortunate. My heart goes to the families of the 16 policemen that were killed, you know, in the most savage manner.
Savage manner.
And it took almost about 1 week. I think 20 policemen were missing initially before they were rescued. I think it's a very complex issue that has so many sides. The first thing is the fact that we have to put it in the historical context. For several years, this country was misgoverned. You know, corruption, military rule, people were unnecessarily militarized. Yeah. And I think we can blame the military for that.
No, we can't keep blaming them.
Yes,
been around for 20
since 1999, we've not been able to resolve the problem of of gun control, of banditry. And 16, 17 years of the PDP, you know, nothing fundamental was done. So I'm just trying to say that it's not a new problem. In fact, it happened in Nasarawa State, where more than 50 policemen were killed.
Yes.
In the latest, you know. In the latest case of Zamfara, I think a lot of issues are connected. The first one is the location of that state itself. It has about 37,000 square kilometers. I think it's the 7th biggest state in Nigeria. It's so large.
Very large.
And it borders Niger Republic.
It also has mines.
Yeah, it has mines that hills.
Yes.
So initially when these bandits were operating in groups, the Air Force had to be attacking them. But they had to divide themselves into smaller groups, making it very difficult for an effective air raid in Zamfara State. Yeah. And I think there's a very poor immigration control, because more or less a borderless, between Zamfara and Niger State.
Yeah, and also in Bauchi.
Yeah, in Bauchi.
Because the Bauchi State governor said that they have a controlled way of trying to say, look, if you don't belong here, you go back.
So if you don't deal with the problem of gun control, you know, it's going to be very difficult, because there are so many arms in the hands of non-state actors. So in dealing with this effectively, we have to address, the fact that people have access to, illegitimate weapons. So I think it's a very complex problem, and I don't think the governor has been able to come up with an effective solution. For instance, he said he's going to, if you bring one AK-47, then you'll be paid about 1 million naira. And to me, I find that very...
How many AK-47s?
Yeah, because it sells for about 400,000 naira in Nigeria, or about 300 to 400,000. So if you want to pay
what do you collect all of them now? You want to sell them?
Yeah, it means people can just look for one AK-47 and then give it to the government to make some profit. So I think we need to look for a more effective, method to deal with this problem instead of just, half measures. Okay,
the stories of a clone president unsettled many Nigerians. Some began to ask Jubril of Sudan or President Muhammad Buhari, who is in charge. All that has now been laid to rest and could have been fabricated by President Buhari's detractors.
I think that sprang up from the experience we had in the days of former President Yaradua. Good. And you saw the cloud that surrounded the management of his health, which also played out when President...
Not only that, there were also governors who were sick.
Exactly.
Governors who were sick, like the governor of Enugu State, Chime, and also Cross River.
Exactly. Exactly. And you recall that even when eventually former President Yaradua died and was brought to the country, there was power outage at the airport. And you see, this must have thrown a lot of doubts into the processes. And in the case of President Muhammadu Buhari, when he was in the UK, a lot of issues came up, the nature, the nature of the sickness, the management and everything. And this must have, led to people doubting the transparency. And in the political situation we have in the country, you expect that propagandists will take advantage or disadvantage of occasions, particularly when the transparency is not on the table. And of course, what you seek to achieve with propaganda is to affect the intellectual reasoning of people their emotional dispositions and everything by bringing up these issues. And my position on this was clear as a form of solution. But the president already spoke in Poland that he is the real president and that he will be celebrating his 76th birthday later in the month. But my position was that if there is a Jubril from Sudan, just invite him to Nigeria to come to the Aso Villa, take photograph with my president. Because whether you...
No, they were saying that that president himself is the Jubril. So
yeah, by substitution.
To come and take a picture with himself.
What is being presented is that President Muhammadu Buhari died. And a school of thought said a man of that office could not have died without even the UK disclosing. But like I said,
yes,
it's because of the cloud.
The hospital itself will have issued it.
Exactly.
And it couldn't have passed through the borders. A body could not pass through the borders without it being recorded that there's a dead person being taken away from.
Exactly. And by virtue...
And if you are even going to bury him, can anybody tell us where he was buried? When did the ceremony take place?
Even by virtue of his religion also, by the Islamic injunctions.
It's immediate.
You see, so, but like I said, in a political situation like the type we have in this country, you expect this. You know that the Biafran radio also is like an emotional and psychological confrontation.
There should be culture in our education, because there are certain fallacies that you should not, an educated person should throw into the dustbin.
Exactly.
I mean, when you are talking about cloning, you know, it's a scientific process. It's not, I mean, it's not something you can just cook up.
No, not all of them said cloning. No.
They are talking about cloning.
Cloning was used as a metaphor.
Yes.
The word clone was used as a metaphor.
Yes.
But what they said was that it was a double.
Yes.
And that they had blackmailed the vice president, blackmailed his wife, and the Kaaba was in charge, and the cabinet, they were in on it, and so on and so forth.
Even if they are talking about cloning, that one is scientifically is not possible. But let us even talk about the question of you know, having a double.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not logical to me. What is the premises? The UK, you know, is a civilized, is a democratic nation with a very vibrant media, very vibrant parliament.
Yes.
There is no way the president of a country will have died in that country, that the old media will have been bought over. You know, it's just not possible.
You can't even buy one medium.
You can't even buy one medium.
Not to talk about.
You know, you have the Guardian there, Daily Mirror, you know, that sniff around every day. There is no way that kind of thing
and
will happen.
The hospital will be obligated to issue the press release and say this,
you know, there's freedom of information. You know, even though he did not disclose the nature of his ailment, Nigerians were going abroad to see him. The pastor of RCCG was there some few days before he came back to Nigeria.
Yes.
And I think members of the opposition, including the Senate president, they had met him after he returned.
And they were all quiet.
And they were all quiet. So there is a kind of silent, you know, conspiracy of silence.
Exactly.
They know it is not true, but they are enjoying, they are thriving in the rumor because they want to score cheap political gains. But I think there should be some, you know.
And then newspapers were quiet.
Yeah.
When the social media
was
agog.
Yeah.
That's why I had to write a column.
The mainstream media,
this matter
you know,
is not small.
Yeah.
So the mainstream media should be careful.
Yeah, it should be careful.
Not to be overtaken by the social media.
By the social media, because it's just not true. And I think it's an organized campaign. Yeah. It's a conscious campaign, because if you look at the social media, they are backing it up with a lot of animation. You know, so there are people that are consciously, you know, they operate
especially in a political season.
a rumor mill where they just shun out all sorts of propaganda, all sorts of lies. Yeah. But I think Nigerians should be intelligent enough to know that there's no way the president can fool his sisters, his wife, his brothers, members of his cabinet, members of the Senate, even the vice president.
The vice president will know that if the president is dead, he becomes president.
And even if he can fool Nigerians, what about Sudan? This Jubril in Sudan hasn't got relations, no brothers, no sisters. So I think, and then how can you bring somebody from Sudan that will automatically speak Hausa fluently with the same intonation? He will speak Fufude. He will also speak Kanuri. And he also identify people in his village, his traditional rulers will know him.
No, they should have come. They would have asked the question. This is your Sudan, Jubril who came from Sudan. Where was he born?
Yeah.
Who was his father and
Yes,
mother? Who was his
yes.
brother?
And
Who is his
yes.
wife?
His
Who,
father,
where,
his
did,
brothers,
where did he grow up?
and of the same
Where
age,
did he,
the same height,
where did he attend school?
the same smile,
The same smile.
the same wrinkles of the face, I mean, the same intonation, speaking like a Nigerian.
The same accent.
I mean,
Because
it's
people wanted to be
ridiculous.
an interesting thing
I
was that
think
many
intelligent
educated people
Yeah.
believed it.
It's deliberate.
And as he said, the background to it came from the fact that we have had opacity in this matter in the
Yeah.
past. And when people were sick, including even this president, information was not forthcoming. Governor Ibikule Amosun says he will work tirelessly to ensure President Buhari's victory in next year's presidential election, but will not support the governorship candidate of the party in the state. Is there a legal? I'm very interested in there must be a legal perspective to it that has not been explored or is being left because of the political toxicity of the matter.
That is at the party's level.
Yes.
He's expected to be loyal to the party.
Yeah.
But there are three tiers of interest in politics. You have the national interest, you have the state interest,
The local government.
and you have part of state is local in what we have in Nigeria.
Okay.
Then you now have the personal interest. And you see all these three playing interchangeably. And that is why Governor Amosu's case is quite peculiar with that of Governor Okorocha.
Yeah.
But we may not be surprised if you look at their background. They have been to parties. You see, you talk of ANPP, ACN, PDP.
So they are not, it's not peculiar to them.
Exactly.
Every Nigerian politician has how I call it, a house of cards.
Exactly. they are like nomadic politicians. And of course, when the interest is threatened somewhere, and the interest here is an extended interest, they are preferred candidates. And the question you ask is, how do we position preferred candidates in democracy? Democracy represents the will of the people. And that is why APC is trying to strike a balance that, hey, you may not be satisfied with the results of the primaries, but this is what the people want.
Yeah.
But then we cannot rule out the fact that politically in the country also we raise giants, or we allow people to raise themselves as giants, and they have a strong influence on the political process.
And the president himself said once that they could, those people who are aggrieved could go to court. It was legally correct, but politically naive.
Yeah, there are so many cases in court, but we know also that if you want to approach your matter in a very fast manner in the country, the last place to approach is the court. So for some of them, they may not want to.
Maybe it was politically smart for him to even say that. Maybe it was politically smart for him to say that because know that it's going to be a logjam.
Exactly, because that will represent respect for the rule of law.
Yeah.
But here now we have, look at what is going on in Imo State also, saying that, okay, I won't leave APC, but I will follow my preferred candidate to his party. So how do you harness the loyalty? But then that is one of the features of the democratic system in this country. So
some people say that Amosun had all of this coming because of the way he had played his politics. He thought, some people say because he thought that his proximity with the president would make him get away with anything.
I think following the politics in Ogun State, what happened to me is not a surprise. Because if you look at Amosun, the way he has handled events in that place, a lot of party members are disenchantted. And that was why they requested for direct primaries. If he's a democratic person, somebody who has respect for organizational discipline, party discipline, he should have, if you are popular, you should go for direct primary because it's more inclusive, and there was actually a primary that held in Ogun State. The current candidate, Prince Dakpo, Abiodun is called 102,305,000. His own candidate, Adekunle Akinlade, is called 23,443. So the person that won almost 3 times. He came forth. His own candidate came forth. So if he was actually popular, it would have been, the party would have supported him. So I think he portrays himself as a man of intrigues. Somebody who is sly. and who has no respect for party structure, you know. And I think his promiscuous political history is what is, you know, I mean,
that's what I said. I had it coming.
So because if you also look at, you know, he has the penchant for trying to pull down, you know, the ladder that usually takes him at top. You know, even those that help him to, when he crossed from ANPP, came to ACN, all those that assisted him, you know, from the Southwest Bloc, you know, he started fighting all of them. So I'm not.
So he created
I don't see. I think there's a lot of contradiction. There's no way.
You want people to be loyal to you, but you don't want to be.
You don't want to be loyal to anybody. There's no way you can support President Buhari at the same time you will be against the same party in your state. It's contradiction. Technically, he is out of APC because his supporters have gone to Allied People's Movement. Yes. You know, so I think he will work consciously to sabotage the APC in that state. If I have my way, if it's to be in the days of Awolowo, they will have expelled him from that party.
That's what I was talking about, the legal aspect of it. I think
that's disloyalty.
I think they are just ignoring.
It's quite sensitive.
It might yet happen.
It might happen.
It might yet happen.
It's quite sensitive for
ticket.
APC now.
He's holding on to the
It's quite sensitive for APC because if they don't manage what is on ground effectively, it may boomerang because you realize that there are many aggrieved candidates across the country.
Yeah, but every state has its own issue. The point is that the governors that are in question are actually working against the grain of the majority of the party there. So if they leave, they are actually a minority. That's what they.
At a time like this, you cannot define the extent of minority definition. Because you don't play this game on the platform of assumption.
Well, you have to look at it happened in Lagos, and
he's holding on to the ticket of APC at the same time, saying that we want to work against the party. That's a bundle of contradictions.
I think we just, like you rightly mentioned, we need to look at the legal framework and the developmental aspect of politics. I think we have not emphasized that.
But you know that law itself is only as important as the politicians want it. Anyway, thank you very much for my guests, Ologun and Adeoye, for being on this show. Welcome to Big Talk. There is nobody more important in this era of election and all the turbulence than the person who is charged with the responsibility as umpire. That is why I have Mahmood Yakubu, the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, as my guest this morning. Welcome very much, sir.
Thank you, Sam.
You have been there on that seat for, let's say, 2 years, give or take. And how would you assess your stewardship so far?
Well, I think it's for Nigerians to assess what we have done. It's always very difficult for one to assess himself. But if you are talking about what we have done since the inauguration of the current commission, let me try and give you some sort of rundown.
Yes.
Immediately after the 2015 general elections, we were confronted by numerous elections, from court-ordered run elections to end of tenure to by-elections. And between 2015 and about 2 weeks ago, the Commission has so far conducted 195 elections into various constituencies based on the 3 categories I have mentioned. And these by-elections have been very useful to the Commission in terms of fine-tuning some of our processes and procedures, including some of the new innovations we introduced. Secondly, we have concluded the planning process for the next election, actually beyond the next election into the current electoral cycle. We inherited a robust election project plan, strategic program of action and strategic plan, covering the period up to the end of 2016. We have successfully initiated, developed and validated the current strategic plan, strategic program of action and the election project plan covering the period 2017 to 2021 with the full participation and active involvement of all stakeholders. Thirdly, the basis for conducting credible election is the voters register.
Yes.
And for the first time in the history of Nigeria, we conducted voter registration continuously as envisaged by the Electoral Act, not intermittently when elections were around the corner. So we have built on the legacy of the last commission, which introduced the full biometric register, by conducting continuously over a period of 16 months, from the 27th of April 2017 to the 31st of August 2018, full registration of voters. That is given the opportunity for Nigerians who have turned 18 and those who could not register before the last election. There were difficulties we experienced. The machines were slow, question of distance and what have you. And also, obviously, resources are never always enough for us to have devolved the registration to the level that we would have loved to devolve. That is the polling unit level. But what we have done during that period is to register 14.5 million new voters.
Yes.
If you add this to the about 70 million voters registered before the 2015 general elections, it means that we have a voters register of well over 80 million. In addition, we gave citizens the opportunity to help the Commission to clean up the register. The law requires that the register should be displayed for claims and objections by citizens, which we did so between the 6th to the 12th of November. The law says between 5 days and 1 week. We have done so. We are right now harvesting all the claims and objections collated from citizens. So I'm happy with the voters register we have. It is by no means perfect. No voter register is perfect, but it's the most robust. And one interesting thing, Sam, about our voters register is that we have the largest database of citizens in Africa. 80 million, complete with their biometrics, the fingerprints, their pictures, telephone numbers were available, addresses, and the voter identification numbers. Most interestingly, the permanent voter card that the Commission issues to registered voters has now become almost an alternative means of national identification by default.
Yes.
So we are happy with that. The next big challenge for us, and we have been overcoming that on a quarterly basis, is to make the cards for those who registered under the continuous voter registration exercise beginning from last year, and those who registered previously but could not collect the cards, to give citizens the opportunity to collect the cards well ahead of the elections. And I'm very happy to report as follows. First, for all those who registered in the second quarter of 2017 to the end of the year, that is between April and December 2017, we have printed and delivered the cards to states for collection by citizens. Then for those who registered in the first quarter of 2018, we have also printed and delivered the cards to the states. For those who registered in the second quarter of 2018, we have similarly printed over 3 million cards and delivered them to the states. And then finally, for those who registered in the last quarter of the registration exercise, that's 4.1 million, we have just finished printing all the cards and we are on the verge of delivering them to the states. The only outstanding cards that we are yet to print, and we have gone very far, over 50%, are for those who applied for transfer or relocation. The law says that you vote while you are registered, but there is provision for you to transfer. So we have printed those cards, about 1 million for transfers, and then an equal number for those who applied for replacement of lost or damaged cards. By latest the beginning of the second week of December, all these cards will be in the states and they will be ready for collection by citizens. Learning from the experience of the 2015 general elections, we are not waiting until very close to the election when the cards will be made available. These cards have been made available on a quarterly basis, and the last tranche of cards will be available end of this month, and then we'll ensure that we deliver to the states for collection. However, it is important for me to stress this. This time around, we are emphasizing collection of the cards, not distribution. Collection simply means that those who register should go and collect the cards. Distribution at the designated centers, our local government offices, but we have devolved the collection at a point during the cleaning up of the voters register at ward level. So the onus is now on the voters to collect the cards, not for people to collect by proxy, with the risk that the cards may end up in the wrong hands. So may I seize the opportunity of this program, Sam, to appeal to religious organizations, civil society organizations, socio-cultural associations, to help sensitize citizens to the importance of collection of these cards, just as they help to sensitize citizens to register. Because it's one thing to register, quite another to ensure that you collect the cards.
There have been some signal elections that you presided over. We have the Oshun, we have the Kitty, we have the Kogi by-elections. Would you tell me what you have learned from these elections, especially because the people have seen them as dress rehearsals for the main dance?
Since I came here, civil society organizations and friends in the media like you have always said that each election we are conducting is a litmus test. So I wonder when we are going to pass the test. But I take it that every election is peculiar. And every election presents the Commission the opportunity not only to introduce new innovations, to learn, to improve on the system, but also to ensure that there are lessons that we carry forward to subsequent elections, every election. You referred specifically to 3 elections. The Ekiti governorship election held in July last year, the Oshun governorship elections in September. You mentioned Kogi. I guess you are referring to the Kogi Lokoja Kutongkarpe federal constituency election held on the 11th of August. What is interesting is all these elections are subject of litigation before the courts. So I will not comment about the details of the cases. But let me say this. Out of all the elections we have conducted so far, only 4 have been nullified by court order. But let me say this. Ekiti, Oshun, for instance, where as far as our processes and procedures were concerned, fantastic elections for us. For the first time in the history of the Commission, we achieved deployment to all the polling units in a major election before 8 in the morning. Personnel and materials waited for voters rather than voters waiting for personnel and materials. From Ekiti, in July, we started tracking the movement of sensitive materials from the CBN, when we took delivery in the presence of all the stakeholders, including party agents, down to the level of the local governments. And then from the local governments to the wards, and then early morning on election day to the polling units. So in terms of our processes and procedures, we are really encouraged by what we achieved in the 2 elections, Ekiti and Oshun.
There's this very nagging question about vote buying, and that vote buying has become more subtle and even more lethal because of the way they are done. In some cases, like in the case of the Ondo election, for instance, the governorship I didn't mention, there was this thing they described as Dibo Kusebe in Yoruba, which means that vote and come and cook a pot of soup. In Ekiti, it was assumed that it's a different way you do it. You don't need to be around the voting area. You'll be far away from the voting area, out of the eyes of INEC. I understand that itself plays some role in Oshun. So INEC does not need to see talks. INEC does not need to see anybody trying to play hanky-panky around the polling area, but the vote is already rigged before it even happened.
Well, thank you very much, Sam, for describing the process. In everything you have said, I haven't heard you say that INEC is either a vote buyer or a vote seller.
No.
INEC is not.
No, it's not.
And some of the challenges we have faced of late of open vote buying at polling units is a direct consequence of the improvements of the electoral process. I like the provision of the Electoral Act which talks about inducement, and vote buying is an aspect of that inducement. Remember, it starts long before the elections. If people, for instance, are branded cooking oil or branded rice or branded food items or other things that they've used to induce voters is as bad as vote buying, even if it doesn't take place on election day. Secondly, you have a situation also where sometimes it's not just the vote buyers, but also the electorate. I will give you the example of a state where we conducted a by-election. The constituency includes the state capital. On election day, I saw reports on the social media of a pandemonium at a polling unit in the state capital. We inquired what was happening. They said the voters were on the queue, but suddenly when the vote buyers arrived, they abandoned the queue and followed the vote buyers. I'm saying this so that we understand the dimensions and how we can approach the matter. The first one for me is enforcement. Whether you induce voters before elections or you buy votes on election day, both are acts criminalized by the Electoral Act. And therefore, those who are involved in that must be apprehended and prosecuted. We can come to the issue of prosecution later and also the involvement, the responsibilities of the commission. But the second responsibility is the commissions. How do we make this impossible at polling units? So we've changed the administration of the polling units. The system provides for open secret balloting. In other words, once a voter is accredited and he or she gets the ballot paper, the choice is made in secret in the voting cubicles. And thereafter, the ballot is dropped into the ballot box in the open. So we realize that as voters move from the voting cubicles to the ballot boxes, some of them have a way of indicating to some of the vote buyers the party that they have voted for before dropping the ballot papers into the ballot boxes. So in Osun, for instance, we introduced a new system altogether, where the ballot box was in close proximity to the polling units, and the agents were sitting right behind the ballot boxes, so the voting cubicles. So they had no direct access to seeing what the voter has voted for as the voter drops the ballot paper into the ballot box. We are looking at other ways by which you can improve the administration of the polling units. But remember our constraint. The polling units are in the main public buildings. Where we have no public buildings, we have them in open spaces. None of these facilities is owned by INEC. There are facilities INEC uses once in 4 years or as the need arises. But nevertheless, we'll continue to look for more imaginative ways by which you can continue to secure the process at the polling unit. When we introduced some changes in Ekiti, we learned that some people for the Osun election were trying to devise a means of beating the commission by moving into the voting cubicles with their smartphones. So once they thumbprint, they take a picture of the ballot paper, and then they just walk away. Then they later show the party they have chosen to the vote buyers, and they are settled. So in Osun State, we introduced a partial ban on the use of mobile phones, not in the polling unit area generally, but between the voting cubicles and the ballot boxes.
It is believed that INEC can do all it wants to follow the legalities and the technicalities of voting, and even the integrity of voting. But you cannot really beat the corruption that is already built in the minds of people.
But I'm sure some of you appreciate the fact that the administration of election is not the sole responsibility of the commission.
I agree.
We'll continue to discharge our responsibilities as provided for by the laws, Constitution, and the Electoral Act, as well as our guidelines and regulations. And we'll continue to improve on this system, one election after another. But managing election is a shared responsibility. Someone has to secure the environment for us to conduct elections. Somebody has to help us conscientize and mobilize the citizens for proper elections to happen. So we'll continue to do our own part. But let me see this opportunity to appeal to other Nigerians to also continue to do their own part, particularly those who are involved in vote buying and vote selling. So we'll continue to do what the law says we should do, and citizens, I'm sure, will appreciate what we have done and the limitations on the part of the Commission, and where other agencies of government should also come in to sanitize the process.
There have been a lot of suits and petitions. How many are there?
The Commission has so far been dragged to court 273 times over the conduct of primaries. And these are litigations from all the political parties. Some are judgments, some are restraining orders, injunctions. We have also received over 30 petitions from candidates over one allegation of infraction by political parties or another. And we also received, as at Monday, 202 requests for certified true copies of documents. Some of this will end up in court. By the time we update, it's going to be much higher. So you have a lot of litigation arising from the conduct of party primaries. Party primaries are entirely the responsibilities of political parties. They conduct their primaries and submit the names of candidates to the Commission. We monitor. But where the Commission needs to come in, obviously, the Commission has been courageous enough to say that no, we cannot vouch for this process without even intervening in the processes, which is entirely a matter managed by political parties, and will continue to do what the law says we should do.
Yes. When you look at all of this, you have lawyers. Do you have enough lawyers to handle all of these cases?
Well, we have lawyers, in-house lawyers. They have been responsible for handling some of the cases, but in other cases we engage private legal firms to represent the Commission. Remember, this is only one aspect of our work.
Yes.
If you look at other aspects, for instance, on the registration of political parties, some associations have dragged us to court. In fact, some of the parties were registered by court order. If you look at litigation arising from pre-election, going back to 2014, some of the cases are still in court. And then, of course, after the 2015 general elections, we were dragged to court 680 times. And since then, only God knows how many times we have been dragged to court.
In APC, there have been at least 3 major contentious states. Just speak to them, Zamfara.
I can't speak to Zamfara because under our jurisdiction, once a matter is before the court of law, you don't comment on it. So the matter in Zamfara is sub judice.
Imo?
The matter in Imo, although sub judice has been resolved in a way, in the sense that there is a candidate nominated by the party whose name we have pasted if you are referring to the governorship election. So that matter, for now, is actually settled on the basis of the law. Ogun, the same thing. Even though there are numerous judgments by the Supreme Court to the effect that only the national executive of a political party can nominate candidates for election to INEC. But again, where the court says something to the contrary, you don't pick and choose. The Constitution says that once a court of competent jurisdiction makes a pronouncement, all persons and authorities in the Federation must obey until that judgment is set aside by a superior court. So it's for those who are aggrieved to now approach the appeal court, but whatever the judiciary says is what we do in the cases that you have mentioned, Zamfara, Imo, and Ogun.
As somebody who is steeped in political science, your experience during the primaries, what does it tell you about our level of political development and our understanding of the dynamics of democracy?
Well, we're evolving. You cannot say that the way primaries were conducted years ago is the same way that primaries are conducted today. Yes, it leaves much to be desired because it is from the conduct of party primaries that we have the candidates that compete in a general election. And we have always said that there must be internal democracy within political parties.
There are so many political parties in the country. The sense is that some of them are there because the law mandates them to be paid money if they are registered.
No, no party is paid money now.
No,
No,
is paid now.
no. They are not run as if they are parastatals of government. There is no money paid to any political party. But on the issue of political parties, I think generally speaking, it is good to have a multi-party democracy. But sometimes we conduct our debates in Nigeria in terms of extremes. There was a time when we had few political parties, and there was so much agitation that the political space should be opened leading to several litigations and subsequently the amendment to the 1999 Constitution to provide for relatively easy procedure for registration of political parties, complemented by the provisions of the Electoral Act. While the Constitution says that a political party that wishes to register, an association that wishes to register as a political party should have an office in the FCT, it doesn't say an office in Gariki or Maitama or Asokoro, and it can be somewhere in Abaji. Abaji is in the FCT. There's no political party that has an office in Abaji, but you know it's the FCT. Yes. So technically speaking, even if a political party has an office somewhere in the area councils, it is in the FCT, it has met the requirements of the law. A certain percentage of members of the National Working Committee should come from 2/3 of the states of the Federation. It's not too difficult to get that. It shouldn't be a religious organization. It shouldn't be sectional. It's very easy to have political parties that reflect that requirements. And then they must also not adopt symbols that are prescribed, like symbols of a cult group or symbol that's restrictive. It must be open to all Nigerians. So, but the Electoral Act also says that if an association applies to INEC for registration as a political party, and that association does not hear from the Commission within 30 days, it is deemed to have been registered. So some of the associations were actually registered by court order. So what we have been doing is, as soon as an association writes the Commission for registration as political party, we acknowledge. So at least we have satisfied the requirement that they have heard from the Commission within 30 days. Now, at present we have 91 political parties, and so many Nigerians are saying we have too many political parties now. Well, those who agitated for the opening up of the political space have the opportunity also to approach the National Assembly to amend the grand norm, the Constitution, so that we can have the number of parties that we think is adequate for the country. But we have 91 political parties. We had over 140 applications from associations for registration as political parties. But we have been operating on the practice that 6 months to an election, any association registered cannot participate in the next general election. So after the general election, then we'll trigger the provision for deregistration of political parties, which I'm happy to say that is now in the Constitution. So we'll see where we go after the general election.
Now, it is just, we'll go back to elections again, and this issue of we don't really get the criminals during the elections properly prosecuted. We don't even get the main criminals sometimes. We just get the small boys.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. For instance, after a state constituency by-election in Minjibir in Kano State, which was initially disrupted by sheer acts of thuggery, we worked with the security agencies, particularly the police. We made arrests and successfully prosecuted over 40 electoral offenders, the highest number of successful prosecutions in the history of the Commission. But again, you are right that we may not have apprehended and prosecuted the mother spiders. The ballot box snatcher is unlikely to be a beneficiary of the election. No. So they must be acting on somebody's behalf. But what does the law say about prosecution of electoral offenders? The responsibility is given to the Commission by law. But look at the processes. To successfully prosecute, you have to make arrest. INEC has no police to make arrest. We only have 4 officials at a polling unit on election day, armed only with the ballot boxes, the smart card readers, the voters register, and other materials for election. They're interested in safeguarding the processes. So even if there are violations in the polling units, it's the security agencies that make arrest. Secondly,
so for that, so it means that you're saying that the law enforcement agencies are failing INEC?
No, the law enforcement agencies have been doing their best. I won't say they are failing the Commission. They have been doing their best to make arrests.
If they can't get those people, they cannot get them. It means they are failing their...
No, but I've told you that we had successful prosecutions in Minjibir. In addition to that, we have over 100 case files that we have been prosecuting jointly with the police. But I said these are the ballot box snatchers and what have you. They are not the mother spiders. So it's very difficult for the Commission to make arrests. The second step towards successful prosecution is to investigate and gather the evidence that will lead to successful prosecution in the courts. The commission has no capacity. So, but we are saddled with the responsibility of prosecution.
Who's supposed to do that?
We'll come to that. But for me, what is even more problematic is that some of the electoral offenders may be officials of the commission. So how do we prosecute ourselves if the commission is saddled with the responsibility of prosecution? And therefore, since 2008, recommendations have been made, first by the Uwais Commission, then by the Lemu Commission after the 2011 post-election violence, and then most recently by the Ken Namani Committee on Electoral Reform, to establish the Electoral Offences Commission and Tribunal, to which all violators of the Electoral Act can be subjected and prosecuted accordingly. So there is a private members' bill before the National Assembly. I think it passed first reading. And I learned also that there is going to be an executive bill on the same subject matter. Hopefully, after the election, the National Assembly will come to that, so that we have an agency that will be responsible for the prosecution of all those involved in electoral malpractices, including officials of the Commission. But at present, INEC is saddled with a responsibility that it has no capacity to discharge effectively.
There's no way we can talk about elections without funding. There was a real turbulent turn during the crisis of the National Assembly when they thought that they're not going to hold, and then how are we going to get money? What is the state of funding?
No, that matter has been sorted out.
Yes.
I think the most important thing for me to stress here is that for the first time ever in the history of elections, an election budget was submitted to the National Assembly by way of a bill, and the Commission appeared before several committees of the National Assembly to defend the budget. So Nigerians know the details. I appeared before the joint leadership of the National Assembly, meaning the two presiding officers and the principal officers. I appeared before the House Committee on Electoral Matters, the Senate Committee on INEC, joint House and Senate committees on INEC. We interfaced with the Appropriations Committee of the National Assembly. I'm happy to say that all these are now behind us. What we submitted to government was exactly what the National Assembly has appropriated. And in terms of disbursement, we'll have no problem, I'm absolutely certain. We have already agreed with the Ministry of Finance on the cash flow, and I'm sure very soon this will be sorted out, even though we have less than 3 months to the election. But we've already taken tentative steps on items that we need to procure long before the elections and items that we need to procure actually very close to the elections. For instance, even if we have all the money today, we can't pay the ad hoc staff. We can't pay for electoral logistics until close to the elections. So in terms of the processes of approval for the funding of elections, we have overcome that one, in the sense that the National Assembly has appropriated, and I'm sure very soon the Executive will make funds available to the Commission.
Oh, there's this question I've always wondered about the power of the INEC chair. It's sometimes exaggerated during elections. Jega used to say when he was there, look, I only rely on what my resident electoral commission sent to me. I don't have anything to do with what goes on in the states. You feel that you are hamstrung in that sense, that if anything happens, you are subject to the reporting of either the REC or the one before the last one?
No, the Commission does not intervene from the center to say this is how elections should be concluded in any state of the Federation. Once you activate the processes, yes, there are officials that take charge in the states. Two of the critical officials are not the regular staff of the Commission, like the collation officers and the returning officer. The returning officer is a very powerful person. Once he makes a pronouncement under the law, only the courts can reverse his pronouncement. And you know, we engage academics from the universities to play that role. The only election in which the Commission at the national level is directly responsible is the presidential, because the Constitution says that the chairman of INEC is the chief electoral officer of the Federation, a returning officer for the presidential election. But it's a system. We have the national, we have the resident electoral commissioners at state level, and then we have mechanisms, processes, and procedures. And we follow these processes and procedures. At the headquarters, We don't intervene to say this is how an election should be concluded in the field. It's for those who are in the field to conclude the processes based on the provisions of the Constitution, the Electoral Act, our guidelines, and our regulations. And we'll continue to do so and uphold the integrity of the process.
Okay. And that's a very interesting way to put it and end this discussion today. We have had the man who will chaperone the election for us. That will be as from February 2019. It's no other than Mahmood Yakubu, the chairman of the INEC that everybody has been focusing attention on. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Sam. My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for watching the program today. You can catch up with my published columns and articles on my website, www.samomasheye.com. Also follow me on Twitter. My handle is @SamOmasheye. Enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, be good.